Hi! Our lesson today will be dedicated to semi-modal verbs. Simply put, these are the verbs that are very similar to modal verbs, the difference being their behavior in a sentence. They don't always behave like modal verbs. Think about the phrase used to. This is a semi-modal which follows its own set of rules, or ought to, which contains to, unlike the true modal verbs. Semi-modal verbs are widespread in the language, and we use them in everyday conversations pretty often. Yet they scare a lot of my students, and they don't dare use them, which is understandable because these verbs are tricky. So, in order not to be afraid to use them in our speech, let's see what are the rules we need to remember. And if you noticed, I used two semi-modal verbs in my introductory speech to this lesson. Let us begin our lesson. Today we are talking about semi-modal verbs. There are 4 semi-modal verbs in the English language. Let's begin by recollecting what a modal verb is. So, a modal verb is a type of auxiliary verb that indicates a modality, such as a likelihood, ability, permission, request, capacity, suggestion, order, obligation, or advice, and is usually accompanied by the base form of a main verb that has a semantic meaning. Now let's see what a semi-modal verb is. A semi-modal verb is a verb that sometimes behaves like a modal auxiliary verb and sometimes like a main verb. Semi-modal verbs are also known as marginal modal verbs. There are 9 modal verbs in English, and we talked about them in the previous video, but let's just quickly repeat. Can, could, may, might, must, shall, should, will, and would. The modal verbs are characterized by the following things. They function as auxiliary verbs. That is, we would say I can dance, I can't dance, can I dance, or can you dance, right? They do not inflect in person. It's impossible to say she cans or he musts. That's absurd. We don't inflect them in person, right? It's always the same form. I can, she can, you can, he can, they can, and so on and so forth. They convey functional meaning, they convey modality, right? But they are not lexical verbs, so you always need a lexical verb after a modal verb for your idea to have sense, right? For your sentence to be full. They are anomalous and cannot be inflected. Anomalous means that they have only one form. For example, let's compare can or shall or any of these verbs that you see on the screen with a lexical verb to begin. In the present simple tense, you will say, she begins to work. In the past simple, you will say she began to work, like yesterday at 9 o'clock in the morning, right? She has begun to work. There are different forms of this verb depending on what tense we are in. With modal verbs, those changes are impossible. They only have one form and that's it. They take a bare infinitive as their complement. We should say, I can dance, you could swim, I may ask, she might come. We cannot say, I can to dance, she might to come, etc. We can only use a bare infinitive, that is, the infinitive without the particle to. And the last thing, two modal verbs cannot be used together. That means that you cannot say, I should can, or she will must, or etc. Yeah? We cannot use 2 modal verbs in a row. Now let's look at what semi-modal verbs are. There are 4 semi-modal verbs in English. They are dare, need, used to, and ought to. Semi-modal verbs sometimes behave like main verbs and sometimes like modal verbs, or they might have other peculiarities in the way they behave in a sentence. Dare and need do function both as modal verbs and as main verbs. We'll see that in several minutes. Used to and ought to have their own peculiarities, peculiarities of their behavior in a sentence. That's why they also belong to this little group of semi-modal verbs. They exhibit different kind of behavior. They violate some of those rules that we know about the true modal verbs, let's say so. Okay, now let's talk about each of them in detail. Dare. Dare can function both as a modal verb and as a main verb or lexical verb. As a modal verb, dare means to be brave, reckless, or rude, depending on the context. I dare not walk in that district at night. I dare not walk. I'm not that brave to walk in that district at night. If he dare do this again, he'll be fired. How dare you talk to me like that? How dare you, You are rude. Dare we say anything against his decision? Dare we say anything against his decision? She daren't tell us the truth. So as we see, dare here functions as any modal verb on the list of the 9 modal verbs of the English language. So it functions just as can or shall or any other modal verb. It negates itself, I dare not, It forms a question, dare we say, just like a typical modal verb. But dare can also be used as a main verb. In this case, either to be brave, reckless, or rude, or to challenge somebody to do something. Let's look at the examples. The students don't dare to speak at his presence. I wanted to laugh but didn't dare. It was more than he had dared to hope for. Would you dare to dive off the cliff? Did she dare to turn her back on you? So here we see that dare doesn't function as a modal verb anymore. It takes an auxiliary verb, do or did or had, depending on what tense we are talking about. So the students don't dare to speak. To form a negative sentence, we take do, add not, and only then we use dare. So the students don't dare to speak. In the past, I wanted to laugh but didn't dare. I did not dare. We do not add not to dare like we did in the example on the left. Here, in our examples on the right, we take a separate auxiliary verb to form that negation. We also can use dare like a lexical verb in complex tenses like past perfect. It was more than he had dared to hope for. Then we have questions. Would you dare to dive off the cliff? Would is a modal verb. It forms a question here. Dare to functions as a lexical verb. And did she dare to turn her back on you? Again, to form a question, we use an auxiliary verb. We use did. Dare does not form a question here. It functions like any other lexical verb. As a main verb, dare might also mean to challenge somebody to do something. He dared me to take part in a singing contest. I dare you to learn a new language. Now let's look at some expressions dare is a part of. Don't you dare. This is an expression that we can use to say that something that a person does is unacceptable, very inappropriate. Don't you dare do that again, or you'll regret it. Don't you dare. It's almost like a threat. I'll tell your father you've been playing truant for a week. Don't you dare. Okay. How dare you? Actually, it's a very similar expression. except that it is used in questions. You've got everything white my desire in life. How dare you complain? How dare you complain? This way we want to say that the person is being ungrateful. How dare you speak ill of your teachers? Shame on you, yeah? How dare you? Another example is an expression which belongs to British English. I dare I say it, or dare say written together. His book is a masterpiece, I dare say. I dare say he's right. This we use when we want to be polite or we're not quite sure whether the thing that we're going to state is true or not. So you can also use I'm afraid in these situations, or I believe. His book is a masterpiece, I believe, yeah? Or I am afraid he is right. I'm brave enough to say it, yeah, even if I risk not being correct. Okay, let's move on to the next semi-modal, which is need. Need is a very interesting word because the way it is used in sentences might seem chaotic, but only if you don't know the rules. Yeah, when you know the rules, you just know that you can use it in several different ways, or I'd rather say in several different forms. Let's see. So need as a modal verb means lack of necessity or obligation. I say lack because mostly we are talking here about negative sentences or questions. So this type of need or modal need we would mostly use in the sentences which express that something is not necessary or required. Let's look at the examples. You needn't worry about it. There is no need to worry about it. Yeah? He needn't know about our plan. Neither of you need stay here after 6 p.m. You needn't have taken warm clothes with you. Nobody need know about this. Need we do this today? So we see again that need functions here as a modal verb. In negative sentences, like you needn't worry about it and he needn't know about our plan, not is added to need. We don't need any additional auxiliary verb because need is an auxiliary modal verb. In questions, need goes to the first place. Need we do this today, like all the auxiliaries do. Now let's look at how need can function as a main verb or as a lexical verb. It will mean necessity or obligation or lack of it if we are talking about a negative sentence. Yeah? So I need your advice. There are a few other tasks that need to be done. You don't need to be rich to be happy. You won't need to bring anything with you. The house needs painting. Do you need some time to think? As you see, need is inflected here, yeah? We have needs. If it's a negative sentence, you don't need or you won't need. We have additional auxiliary, yeah? We have don't and want that show that this sentence is negative. In the question, do you need some time to think? We have do, again an auxiliary that helps us form a question, because need here is a semantic verb. The situation here is like the one we had with dare. Pay attention though that on the left you see need followed by a bare infinitive, which is a must because we are talking about a modal verb here. On the right we have particle to when we add another verb after need. You don't need to be rich. You won't need to bring anything with you. Okay, need is a part of several expressions. Let's look at them. If need be or if needs be, which means if it is necessary, if it is something which is expected. You can come with us. If need be, we can rent a bigger car. If it is necessary, we can rent a bigger car. I have a lot of work left. I'll work on Saturday and Sunday if needs be. I'll work on Saturday and Sunday if it is necessary. I need hardly do something. Remember, please, that hardly is a negative word, so when you use it in a sentence, your verb must be in the positive form. I need hardly say what an outstanding person our guest today is. I need hardly say means that I don't actually need to say it because it's obvious. I need hardly explain you how important this opportunity is for the firm. I don't need to explain you because you know it. I don't need to explain you this because it's obvious, right? It's very clear. The last one, need you ask. This is an exclamation that we can use to answer somebody's question when the answer to this question is obvious. Let's see. Did he win the race again? Need you ask. That's obvious that he did. Are you happy to be home after all these years? Need you ask. Need you ask. Of course I am happy. Okay, used to. Well, used to is a special semi-modal which is used only in the past. That's why to negate it or to make a negative sentence with used to, we will use an auxiliary did. It's very special. It expresses a past habit, condition, or fact that is no longer the case. And it is very special because it's unique among the modal and semi-modal verbs. The question and negative of used to is formed the same way as for main verbs in the past tense, by using the auxiliary did. You just have to remember it. Yeah, you just have to memorize what used to means and how we use it. It's unique in the language. Okay, I used to wake up early when I was a student. I don't have to do it anymore. I don't wake up early now. We used to study at the same college. We don't study anymore. He used to smoke a lot. He has quit it. He doesn't smoke anymore. She didn't used to like movies about war, but now she does. I didn't used to like dark chocolate, but now I do. I do like dark chocolate. Did you used to live in Sydney? Yes, I did. Yeah, the answer to this question might be yes, I did, but now I don't. I don't live in Sydney anymore. Now I live in Barcelona. Okay? So in all these sentences, we are talking about actions that used to take place in the past, used to happen in the past, but in present the situation is different. They don't happen anymore. These are usually habitual actions. These are situations which were repeated again and again in the past, but do not happen anymore. Now, the problem is that we have other structures in the language which are very similar to used to. These are be used to or get used to. These verb combinations, these verbs mean to be accustomed to or to get accustomed to form a habit, or to become okay with something. Be used to and get used to are main verbs. That makes them different from used to, very different from used to. We will see that when we compare them with used to. Now let's look at some examples with be used to and get used to. We are used to cold winters. She is used to driving big cars. My friend is not used to living in the city. He wasn't used to riding a lot. Are you used to living on such a high floor? These sentences express something that is a natural or habitual state for the person we are talking about. So we are used to cold winters. We are accustomed to cold winters. We are okay with cold winters because we have lived here for quite a while and we now are okay with cold winters. She is used to driving big cars. She has a habit of it now. My friend is not used to living in this city. He is not accustomed to living in this city yet. He wasn't used to writing a lot. In the past, he didn't have such a habit. He wasn't used to writing a lot. We will compare this to the sentence he didn't used to. He didn't used to write, which will mean he didn't do the action in the past. He wasn't used to writing means that he wasn't accustomed to writing. It wasn't okay for him to write a lot. Are you used to living on such a high floor? Are you used to? Are you okay with living on such a high floor? Now, get used to. Let's also look at some examples. I'm getting used to living in a village. I am becoming okay. Yeah, I am getting accustomed to it. She was homesick. She never got used to Oslo. She never got accustomed to Oslo. She never started feeling okay about living in Oslo. People can get used to anything. People can get accustomed to anything. Yeah? People can form a habit of doing anything, yeah, or of being in any kind of condition. They haven't got used to the new schedule yet. They haven't formed such a habit yet. They are not okay with the new schedule yet. Are you getting used to your new job? Are you okay with your new job? Are you accustomed to your new job? Now let's compare be used to, get used to, and used to. We, on the left, we are used to cold winters. We are okay with cold winters now. Yeah, so we got accustomed. On the right, winters used to be cold when I was a child. In the past, winters were cold. Now they are not. She is used to big cars. Again, the sentence is in the present, and she now is okay with driving big cars. She has formed such a habit. On the right, she used to drive a lot when she worked at the hotel. She used to drive. In the past, she drove a lot. But now she doesn't drive. He wasn't used to writing a lot versus he didn't used to write a lot. He wasn't used to, again, he wasn't okay with writing a lot. It wasn't his habitual state, yeah? And he didn't used to write a lot. He didn't have such a habit. I understand that these two are pretty close to each other in their meaning, but in the sentence on the left, he wasn't used to. We are talking about his state or his condition. In the sentence on the right, with used to, we express an action. Yeah, we speak about an action which was repeated again and again in the past and doesn't repeat anymore. The next, are you used to living on such a high floor? Again, are you in this condition? Are you okay with it? We are talking about the state. On the right, did you used to live on a high floor? We are talking about the habit in the past. Did you do it? Yeah, did you live for a while on a high floor in the past? So once again, to sum it up, when we say, when we use be used to or get used to, we are talking about a person's state or condition, and we can use it in different tenses. When we use used to, we speak about the actions which repeated in the past, which were habitual in the past, but doesn't happen anymore. And used to can only be used in the past. Yeah, we use it in the past simple tense. Okay, Ought to is the last semi-modal that we will talk about today. We read this combination of letters as ought to. As usual, GH are not read before the letter T. Ought to expresses that something is viewed as correct, preferable, necessary, probable, likely, or expected. Actually, these are all the things that should can express. So should is a synonym of ought to, but should is a modal verb, while ought to is a semi-modal. Let's see. The guests ought to be here by now. The guests should be here by now. It is expected, that they should be here by now. You ought to see Venice someday. You ought to. You should. It's preferable to see because it's a very beautiful city and an important one in the history of our civilization. She ought to have told me what to expect. Here, ought to expresses reproach, So we expected that she would tell us something, but she didn't. And we say, she ought to have told me what to expect. We can also say, she should have told me what to expect. You ought not to spend so much time in front of the computer. You should not spend too much time in front of the computer. We oughtn't make noise. It's almost 10 p.m. It's a bad idea to make noise at 10 p.m. Because it's late. We oughtn't. This shortened form is also possible. We can say ought not to, which sounds pretty formal. Or we can say we oughtn't make noise. We oughtn't make noise. Okay. Ought we find a paid parking not to leave the car unattended? You can omit to after ought. Ought we find or ought we to find a paid parking not to leave the car unattended? Should we find a paid parking? Oughtn't he study for his English exam? Isn't it expected, that he should be studying now? So as you see, unlike should, which is possible in all of the sentences, ought is followed by to. All modal verbs are followed by the bare infinitive. What is special? What is special about this verb? Why is it on the list of semi-modals? Why can't we say that it's just a modal verb and that's it? Well, because there is this particle to. It doesn't belong to the modal verbs because it breaks the paradigm, which is the same for all those 9 modal verbs. As we see, ought to has its own peculiarities. As to whether to use should or ought to, well, it's up to you. I know that my students prefer to use should, and it's understandable. First of all, you will hear should more often. Second of all, ought to is a weird word as far as its spelling goes. But they are synonymous, and both of them are used to say that something is it's a good idea, Ought to can also be used to give a piece of advice, like you should do something. You can also say you ought to do something. The only difference perhaps would be that ought to is like a little bit more formal, than should. Okay. That's all for today. I hope this lesson was useful. If you have any questions, please leave them down below, and see you in the next lesson.